Zoom. So you ready to start? Oh, excuse me, I'm going to call this meeting to order. If you would follow along with the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Marshall, would you provide a prayer, please? Sure.
If you'll bow your heads with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening and the ability to gather together as individuals and leaders in this community to listen to the citizens with open hearts and open minds as you give us the gift of discernment and wisdom to make the best decisions that will help Branson grow far into the future. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Thank you, Marshall. Madam Clerk, can we get a roll call, please?
LeBlanc.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Howden.
Here.
Milton.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Denham. Here. Benton.
Here.
Your Honor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And for those of you listening online, Alderman Rodriguez and Alderman Cooper are attending this meeting via Zoom. So item number 1 is the discussion on City of Branson economic development priorities and respective updates to City Economic Development Plan. We will begin with hearing from the public. So is there anybody in the audience wishing to share thoughts and comments about the path and discussions we're on? They don't have to sign up.
They can just come to the podium and state their name.
No initial comments? Oh, good. Yeah.
Good evening. Andrea Seitz, currently with Arvest Bank, and I'm here this evening from a regional economic development perspective. I also serve as treasurer for the Missouri Economic Development Council and on the executive committee for the Ozarks Region Workforce Development Board. And through that experience, before Arvest, I was the economic development practitioner for Christian County. Proudly live in Highlandville, so Christian County resident. But through that lens, it really did give me such an appreciation and understanding for how pivotal Branson is working alongside with Springfield and really tying our entire region and our labor shed together. I've had the opportunity to really work as we advocate for additional housing in this area through projects, specializing with the International Residence Hall and things that we want to continue to move forward and strengthen the tourism here in Branson. And there are wonderful programs that are going on and conversations that are being had, and so encouraged to just really see the direction and the interest that you all have taken in aligning all along that corridor, because it really does make all of us stronger. And just thank you for the work that you're doing, and happy to answer and volunteer. I got to meet with Kathy recently and just share any insights or expertise. But as we advocate on the state level, making sure that the voices alongside Jonas, he and I have worked together for several years, and just making sure that that voice is heard and elevated. So thank you.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Andrea. Speaking of Jonas, Madam Clerk, would you read Jonas provided us a letter. I know he couldn't be in attendance.
Yes.
Would you read that into the record for all of us, please?
Yes. Mayor Milton, members of the board, and administrator Stepp, my apologies for not being here in person, but I had previous commitments on my calendar when these meetings were scheduled. Let me start by thanking you for taking the initiative and proactive approach to reviewing and updating your economic development policies and incentive programs. As I stated in a recent meeting, economic development incentives can be a complicated topic with very polarizing views and opinions. We have many examples in our community and region of successful projects and developments that are win-wins and would have not have happened without utilizing these tools. Using these tools and policies to foster future growth and development is a tried and true strategy in communities throughout our country that are happening daily. With most of these strategies, there are goals and desired outcomes. What should those be for the City of Branson and the greater Branson tourism market? My hope is that the results of this and the next 2 meetings will be the feedback from stakeholders, business owners, and developers that guide you to those goals and outcomes. I have a few broad topics that I would request you consider in these discussions. Number 1, developments and projects that support and expand the efforts for a 12-month economy with year-round jobs. Number 2, highest and best use projects along the 76 entertainment corridor, more specifically, projects and businesses that generate sales tax. Number 3, identifying shovel-ready sites/land within city limits and posting those on the city website. Parcels with all utilities available at the property line at minimum and with no known development challenges with the property. Number 4, in all of this, we can't forget housing. With development, redevelopment, and expansions, we will need more workforce to fill the new jobs, and those folks must have safe and affordable places to live. There are other discussions and efforts happening on that topic, but I just wanted to mention it as the overall costs of developing housing inventory are prohibitive. We need to seriously consider incentives and other cost-cutting measures in the spirit of public-private partnerships. Thank you again, and we're looking forward to working with you on these initiatives for our community moving forward. Please contact me with any questions, comments, concerns, and criticism. Kindest regards, Jonas.
Thank you very much. Jonas submitted that before our first meeting, and I know it went on the record of the meeting. I just wanted to have it read out loud so everybody could hear Jonas's input. Obviously, he has a lot of insight of working with the developers and that coming into Branson. Now we will hear from our city attorney, Joe Lauber. Joe?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Good to see you all. It's amazing how fast the pages of the calendar fly off, and it's been a month since we last visited, and it goes by quickly. So I'm excited to be here this evening to continue our discussion on an economic development policy update for the city of Branson and bringing that forward. Controller, thank you. Okay. I would like to start this evening to kind of just touch base again very quickly on where we've been, kind of where we are, and where we're going. We're doing that in a microcosm for just this process, but if you really think about it, that is exactly what we're doing in a big picture as well with respect to economic development. So if you recall, we started out in the first meeting, we talked about the history of Branson and how it has gone from, kind of just a little community on, Lake Taneycomo to a world-class tourism city, and what that must have taken to get to that point, and then what we will be doing with the baton that we've been handed as we go forward. So we began with a process talking about the importance of setting goals, establishing priorities, formulating criteria, developing strategy, all of which will ultimately be reflected into an economic development incentives policy that we will soon be presenting to you based on the input that we've been gathering. Tonight, we'll continue to establish priorities and set goals regarding the city's economic development. As we've gone through this process, we have heard that the continuing development of local business, development of sports facilities, establishing 12-month economy, we just heard that in Jonas's comments, affordable housing, workforce housing, and taking care of blighted or undeveloped areas are all areas that the city would like to work work on through the use of economic development tools. And tonight we're going to dive a little bit deeper into those goals. At the second meeting, if you'll recall, this was our one of our opening slides, and we went through all of the various tools that you can utilize for economic development incentives, and these again are what we call local option tools. Okay, so that means that it is within the city's jurisdiction to use statutory authority that's been given to us by the state to utilize certain public funds for economic development purposes. Okay, each statute, if you remember, we went through it, that has certain rules and procedures, and you can use the money in certain ways, and you can create funds in certain ways, and so forth. And so we learned, about how those work, and a little bit also about how those can be utilized when you have certain goals, and you have a project that will help achieve one of those goals. That the way that we can help a developer or an applicant who comes forward looking to help you achieve one of those goals is we can work with them with these types of tools going forward. And so, so that's the importance of all of that. Each tool is different, and some projects may utilize a combination of tools. We learned a little bit about that as well. Some of these tools, like TIFs, may be better for retail projects where there's a large generation of sales tax, because that kind of drives the amount of incentive. Other tools may help attract industrial or manufacturing projects, such as Chapter 100 incentives we talked about. And some, like Chapter 353, are better used for residential and commercial revitalization and rehabilitation projects. As we kick off tonight to start to get into a little bit more detail towards what we would like to see in a policy, I would like to talk with you about several kind of general concepts, if you will. And I would say that all solid economic development policies will have some general guidelines for all applicants to follow. And among the purposes of having these general guidelines are, several, and one includes to allow for the transparent and fair distribution of incentives, right? The last thing you want to do is be in a situation where applicants or people in general get the feeling that you're picking and choosing winners, or you're picking and choosing, which projects you like versus which ones you don't. A policy that sets forth those guidelines and goals is very clear, it's very transparent. If someone comes forward with a project that solves a problem, we help them. If someone comes forward with a project that solves their problem, maybe not so much. And it gives us that opportunity to help clearly show an applicant when they walk in the door the difference between the two. Are we solving our problem, our community's problem, right? Or are we solving just your problem as a developer? Because when we spend public funds, it really should be to reach a public goal. Another purpose for these guidelines is to just do that, set expectations for applicants. Applicants sometimes, I think, may come in and they don't really know that much about the tools, they don't know much about the process, and so, it kind of, to have a policy that you could even post on your website, and someone could be sitting at home in their jammies with their slippers on, and they could read through your policy and understand, oh, if I do this, I'm gonna be asked to, put in a preliminary funding agreement, or I may, I'm gonna have to, be required to bring my own counsel, and there, some things like that you can set goals, for that, so that people, have that expectation when they come in, or at least they have a better understanding, or at least a source of information before they walk in the door. Because sometimes that can be kind of daunting if they're not used to that type of a process. Another purpose for the general guidelines is also to provide guidelines for staff to connect projects to the goals that have been set by you. Okay, we talked about already the fact that certain tools are better for achieving certain goals, and so if our staff has good guidance from you as to what your goals are, when an applicant comes in and is able to say, they've got a project, and we say, aha, we know that that's one of the priorities of the council. We're gonna, really, pay a lot of attention to this application, and here are the types of tools that we can help connect to make all that happen. And it makes the process so much more, I don't know if enjoyable might be a little overdone, but it makes it a much more efficient and professional process when you're able to marry that stuff up and bring a project forward that it's sometimes it can be extremely clear that it's a really good project for the community, and and it helps the developer, and so fantastic, everybody wins. Finally, among the purposes of the general guidelines is to give the public confidence that the use of incentives is supported by strong public policy and good stewardship of public funds. There are a lot of folks out there, and I do this for a living, and I tend to be kind of fiscally conservative, and I don't know that I want to see a lot of public funds going to the things that private individuals should be able to accomplish. But there are hurdles to development. There are obstacles that may make it more difficult to develop in Branson compared to other areas in this region, maybe even in this state. And those are the types of things that we need to, essentially have an inventory of, to be cognizant of, and to find ways to knock those barriers down and to help developers, look at a situation where if they're choosing between, something in, say, Ozark or Nixo or someplace like that versus Branson, if it ends up being more expensive here or there's other, types of obstacles, how do we overcome that so we give people, we give ourselves a level playing field to have that development happen here as opposed to somewhere else? The other piece of that is I've heard in other communities where I have worked on projects, you'll occasionally have someone come up during public comments, oh, this is, corporate welfare or something like that, where, again, we shouldn't be giving, funds, and so again, if we're cautious about how we give out the funds and we're careful and we make sure that incentives are being given to applicants who truly need them, and it's not simply padding someone's returns, padding their pockets, but it's actually, overcoming that obstacle. There are ways that we can, when we go through the application process, if we make certain requirements of an applicant, we can, do that math, if you will, prior to the application even coming forward. And so when we stand here, either as staff or as an applicant who's presenting their project, we can confidently say, we've run this trap, we've done this test, we've looked at this angle, and here was the result. And quite frankly, back to that kind of, back to the staff guidelines piece of it, if we have those types of procedural requirements in place, it makes it easier for staff to, to maybe at an early level, for the applicant say, guys, I know that you really want these incentives, but when we did the litmus test on this, it says your return with the incentives is going to be, 50%, when most developers across the region or even in the country would do it at 18. Why would we ever, as a city, give incentives to incentivize a project to get a 50% return when everybody else would do 18? That's over incentivization, and that's not being a good steward of public funds. And so there are tests, and you have Baker Tilly as your financial advisor, and we can, have them involved in projects that will allow that kind of test to occur, so that we can, say, we ran this test. They're typical. That's kind of a but-for analysis, which I'll get to in a second here. But their test would say, we took a look at what return would these folks make without any incentives, and then what would they make with the incentives they requested, and they'll measure that against what people typically make in this arena, and take a measurement to say, hey, they're asking for incentives. The analysis would show that they are, deserving of, this project does need incentives to happen, but maybe at a lower rate. And so maybe that's a circumstance where, if you remember from the last time we talked, let's say you have a TIF project and, pilots and EATs, maybe you do something where that project is only granted a certain amount of EATs revenues and none of the pilots. Well, that's great, because then the project, if it is a startup project and it creates that new tax revenue, right? On the sales tax side, it's paying for itself, and then on the property tax side, we're not hurting, our fellow taxing jurisdictions like the school district, for example. So these are all, great ways that all of this stuff starts to kind of really fit together. So in effect, These are kind of comparable to the 10 Commandments for the use and award of public incentives for economic development. These truly form the shalls and the shall nots. So we'll go through each of the items on the next 2 slides with the anticipation that these are good concepts that we are recommending that you have in your policy. So please assume for this discussion that this is something that you will see in your policy when it comes back for your review. So as you're listening to what each bullet point kind of is designed to do, if you feel like you have an objection to that, please speak up now. Let's talk about what that objection would be. If you're in agreement that that sounds like a good public policy from that standpoint, then that's something that you will see in the policy coming forward, okay? All right, so we're gonna run through the bullet points here. So the first one, all applicants requesting incentives must show that but for the use of incentives, the project would not be feasible, financially feasible. And that gets back to what I was just saying about, developers are not going to do a project for free. None of us want to work for free if we can help it, right? Maybe you would like to volunteer, but you gotta be able to make a living, and developers need to make a living. The question is, though, it is that question of if a financially feasible project would make a 20% return and the developer is coming to us for incentives so that they can make that 50% return, that doesn't make any sense from that standpoint. And so what this bullet point gets to is that when a project comes forward and asks for incentives, you're essentially would be telling staff that every project needs to go through a but-for analysis. I would say, if this project is feasible on its own without incentives, don't even bring it forward, okay? Any disagreement on that?
No, I think an example of that, would be rock, right? I mean, if a development could go into Ozark or a development could come here, it's possible or probable they wouldn't choose Branson, but for the
Right.
extensive infrastructure cost.
And it could be, yeah, and I mean, that's something that can build in. Now, what I'm really talking about here is dollars and cents, right? It's purely a formula, it's an equation, and, it boils down to, now, whatever is the cause of, the
Okay.
increased cost, to reduce, in the end, the return that a developer would make, so let's say, on average, it costs $1 million to build a project. But to build a project in Branson, it costs $1.5 million because you have to blast or, pound out rock or do whatever. Then why would a developer come to Branson when they could build that same project for $500,000 less someplace else? That's an impediment to development. That's a good reason to give incentives to make that happen. Okay. Now, there's a lot of rock in Branson, and I don't know that would necessarily mean that you would want to do incentives for every single project in Branson. But what I would say is that may be one that you might look at giving some sort of an incentive to help offset costs, because that's one of those things that would say, generally in Branson, we have a lot of rock that isn't in other areas. So maybe, but you could also say, if it's determined that you have, rock on your site and it increases your build cost by more than X%, the city would incentivize anything above that. That's an example of a very detailed piece. Now, remember, we're not really doing details here, right? Big picture, but hopefully, with your example, Mayor, that would show how, if you're doing but for, there may be some things that we could build into your policy that would do that. And so, I will tell you that is already a note that we have, or is rock. I mean, I even personally, I don't remember if I said this earlier in the process or not, but I personally reached out to a developer that's a friend of mine in the Kansas City area, and I asked if they might be interested in doing a project, because they had a similar something that they're doing elsewhere that I think would be a good project here. And rock was one of the things that I was cited as a reason that they have shied away from Branson. I was like, okay, and it's come up in other ways now in these conversations. So clearly that's an obstacle that maybe we have here that isn't elsewhere in the state.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Alderman Cooper has his hand up on Zoom, so I think he may have
I
a
can't
comment
see it.
when the appropriate time is.
I can't see it.
I can, hold on.
Alderman Cooper, is your hand up?
I got my hand up.
What say ye?
Well, I was just, obviously, as Joe mentioned, the but for there, if, I'm assuming that that would mean the city would do some kind of deep dive into the financials of these developers to see if they're stable enough to do it on their own without incentives. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and how that happens practically in a policy is, the policy itself would say that a but-for analysis is required. One of the other things, I think we'll cover it here in a little while, but one of the other things that we've talked about is, that concept of a preliminary funding agreement, where if an applicant, is asking for, sometimes millions of dollars of incentives, then they need to, put some upfront money for the city to pay for its own consultants to look into whether, the project that they're bringing forward is truly feasible, because it's easy for someone to say, like, oh, I've got these numbers here, and, they may have, used their eraser a little bit too much or whatever, and, they've made the numbers work for them. It's better to have, from the city's perspective, have somebody on a third party come in and do that. So the application process would require, it would say, applicant, you're going to go through a but-for analysis. They're going to submit information to the city's financial advisor. That financial advisor would essentially be funded by the applicant through the funding agreement. So there's no, cost of the citizens just to look into this in the first place. And what I would say, taking it out to the nth degree, is the fact that if the project is successful, that cost can be a reimbursable project cost of the project. So that can go into, what it took to build the project. So it all kind of can work full circle if it's the kind of project that makes the most sense, from a public policy standpoint. I hope that answered your question,
Yeah.
Alderman Cooper.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Hey, Joe,
Yes,
can I
sorry.
ask you a question real quick?
It's such a good system. Like, it actually sounded like he was here, and so it sounded the same as, so sorry about that.
Fair enough. Good job, Chad. So it seems to me that in looking at this big picture, that you come into these economic incentive discussions thinking about like growth and financial growth for the future of your city. But then when you enter in the concepts of like blight, or like what Cody had brought up at the last meeting about the 76 revitalization project,
Yes.
that sometimes you actually are trying to serve two masters. You're trying to serve growth, but you're also trying to serve like beautification, right? Maybe that your answer is no, but I'll just ask
Well,
this
no, I
question
would
here.
say it's okay to have more than one goal.
Fair enough.
Like, you can have, and when we get into the second part of this tonight, after we get through kind of this kind of 10 Commandments, if you will.
Sure.
This piece, then we're going to get into some of more of those discussions, because you guys, thank you very much for participating in the survey that Alex put out. And we have some good information. We're going to actually share that back with you tonight. And we're going to start talking about some of those concepts as to say, because remember, we talked about, as you look at a policy, you should really say, what's your short term, what's your midterm, what's your long term. Well, you all have answered that now.
Right.
And so we can talk about that. And then, you also, through your survey, you talked about, what should we be doing in the short term, the midterm, and the long term. And then, there's some that, when we get through that, you're going to see there were some wild leaders, and there were some that were pretty tight. So, there may be a few where you say, these are kind of neck and neck. So really, these three things are, they're on the to-do list for, midterm, for example.
Right.
And then, there was one that I kind of saw that actually kind of carried through all three. So it's really important to you all, because it's something you want to just be on right now, but you want to be on 20 years from now too. So, but
Nice.
let's not steal too much thunder for a little bit here.
Could I throw this out there, and then if it comes up, maybe you could address?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a famous video of these little old ladies driving down the Strip in 1986, right?
Okay.
And the Strip had trees on every, almost every single parcel. It was much more forested, right?
Okay.
So in the original 76 revitalization project, a lot of the empty spots had kind of like a Veterans Memorial Garden or things like that.
Yeah.
So maybe as we discuss these incentives and we talk about the beautification and something that I've always thrown out, which is that the Strip is going to be judged just as much by its empty or blighted spaces by the ones that are going to be, flashy and look great. So maybe you might throw out if there's any opportunity for a beautification TIF or one that would allow you to plant a garden. I mean, is that even, so anyway, if that comes up, maybe just throw that
Absolutely
my
will,
way.
and you're going to be pleasantly surprised when you see what the results of the survey were, so. Okay. All right, so the next one I'll cover, it's actually very related to the first one. We've already talked about it to some extent. So the first bullet point is distinct from the second one. The first one says, we're not going to use incentives unless the project wouldn't be feasible without them. Okay? The second bullet point says, if it's not feasible without them, we're only going to give incentives to the amount that gets it to feasible. So the idea is we're not, I've been exaggerating with the 20% return jumping up to a 50% return, but, using, maybe more real numbers, if a developer would do a project for 18%, like 12 to 18%, we're not looking to incentivize them to make a 25% return, okay? On that, or even a 22% return, we want to incentivize there. And so that incentive would say that, yes, you've shown us that your project wouldn't be feasible without incentives, but you've asked for 10 million and it would really only take you 7.5 million to get you to the point of feasibility. And so we're going to find ways to sharpen your pencil for you with respect to your ask on incentives. So everybody good with that concept as well, not overpaying?
The commercial broker side of me wants to come out.
Everybody comes here with their baggage.
I've been in the business long enough to see hundreds or probably thousands of pro formas. And I'm here to tell you, it's not uncommon for those pro formas to be way off.
Yep.
And some of it is because of the assumptions that are made that went into the formula. Others are based on outside factors, weather, wars, interest rates, and all that. So I'm a little cautious on putting all our eggs in the basket of saying, based on this pro forma, we will or won't do certain things.
Well, so as a commercial broker, what I would ask you is would your commercial banker, how do they feel about investing in a project, saying that they would or would not do it based on a pro forma, right? Because all we have is a crystal ball at the time an application comes in, right? It's swag at best.
At best.
Okay? So I guess from that standpoint, what would you do? I mean, what I can tell you is this, is that, and I don't remember if this is one of our bullet points or not, but commonly in the redevelopment agreements that we produce for our clients, that when they come forward with the crystal ball and they have projections and they have estimates and they say, we're gonna do this fantastic thing for you in exchange for your $10 million, what we will put in that agreement is to say that, but if you fall short of that investment, we're not going to give you 10 million. We're going to limit it down to 8. Okay, and so we have, those are commonly called clawbacks. That might make sense, from that standpoint. So we usually put that kind of thing in the development agreements. I'll tell you right now, just in the last week or two, we've been working with the Kuvera partners and their great project, the aquarium, and we're at a phase right now where we've gone through the administration of the TIF contract to the point that they've shown the proof of what they invested in the project. And I can stand here and tell, I don't know numbers off the top of my head, but I can tell you that they ultimately invested more in that project than they thought they would. It was a more expensive project for them than they thought at the time, okay? And so, but there was a clawback in the agreement that said that if you guys don't spend that amount, we're gonna reduce down the incentive. So we were able to, Baker Tilly did the analysis on that for the city, and they were able to check the box to say, yep, they invested more, so that clawback goes away. That one's been satisfied, you know. But there are other clawbacks that we actually have in that particular agreement that say that based on the incentives and what their projections are for revenues and things like that, that if they, you know, I think it's every 5 years, there's a look back on that. And it says that if you guys have made more money than you anticipated on your pro forma, then, you know, what was initially thought at that time, there's a small clawback in that as well. Okay, so there's a kind of a true up, if you will.
Yeah.
And so those are, I mean, it's very technical stuff. It's in the 50, 60 page, you know, redevelopment agreements that end up, you know, coming with those things. But all of that, what I will tell you, that's the down in the weeds stuff that your staff and consultants take care of. If you're telling us that we want to make sure that we will only incentivize a project to the extent that it is feasible, that is how we get we're in the weeds and we take care of that for you. Those are the details if you guys give us the big picture.
Fair enough.
Okay, the next bullet point is terms for incentives will be the least amount of time necessary to make the project feasible. Okay, we talked last time. TIF can last for 23 years once you activate a project. But remember, once you approve a TIF plan, you have up to 10 years to activate the plan. And then once you activate, you know, each project, it can go for 23. Well, what if the project pays off in 18? If you have a policy, you have a term like this in your policy, a general term, whether it's CID or TIF or whatever, it would allow us to shut down an incentive if it reaches its goal sooner, okay? By statute, many times, they have to shut down if the project was off the other direction and it didn't produce. That's the risk of the developer typically in those, okay? So is that one, everybody good with that? Okay. The next one is incentives are granted on a case-by-case project, case-by-case basis. Each project is different, okay? You know, many times I will have, you know, elected officials come to me and they kind of, you know, have a worried look on their face usually, and it's like, well, if we do this, we've created a precedent, you know, and, you know, we're going to have to do this for everybody. No, not necessarily, especially when it comes to economic development incentives, right? And this is probably the best illustration of the idea of why it is so important for you to set goals and to check the box when you achieve the goal, right? And that is, if there is something that you need in this community, and there is a developer who is willing to take the risk to be the person who stuck their neck out first to make that happen for the city, I think you should absolutely reward that person for taking that additional risk and help them reduce the financial risk of doing that through incentives, okay? But if that person does it, and then the next person says, well, shoot, I need incentives too to do the same thing, they're chicken, you know, where's the risk in that? They're not the ones who, you know, had to, you know, blaze through the forest and leave a path for someone else. And so what I would suggest to you is that, you know, once you achieve a goal, you shut the door on that goal and back to your priorities, you know, now you've got a new number one, right? You know, and maybe we get through your first, you know, your short-term priorities. What if you knock through those in half the time? Fantastic. Then we start moving up some of your midterms. Maybe it's time to go back through your policy, or at least just the goal-setting piece of it, which you all should be doing, you know, almost constantly, but certainly annually, right? You should be updating, you know, what your goals are and whether you're achieving them, and we should be reporting that information to you to see, you know, how successful has this policy been, and how successful is our program, and how do we continually refine it to make Branson better, you know, a better place, to make the development atmosphere here better, okay? So, again, if we, you know, that's laid out in the policy, you know, it makes it a little easier for staff. You know, for example, if you have an applicant that comes in and says, you know, I just saw that so-and-so got, you know, $10 million in TIF money, and by gosh, I have to have $10 million of TIF money too, you know, and it's like, well, I mean, not necessarily. Let's talk about your case, you know, and maybe their case is they literally are coming in with, you know, item number 2 on your to-do list. Sweet. great. That's exactly what we want, right? But if they're trying to redo item number 1 that was already checked off, like, why would you incentivize that? Okay? All right, the last one on this page, number 5, is all projects require due diligence, right? So essentially, I've seen it before. I think I gave you the example of the guy that came up from Georgia and, laid out the theater and was like, build this, it's like, in the end, what it says is, we're gonna check your numbers, we're gonna check your request, we're gonna check that you're on the up and up, right? That you're a developer who knows what they're doing, that you're financially trustworthy. Before we hitch our wagon to you, we're gonna check you out, okay? We're gonna at least Facebook stalk you, right? So, we're gonna do more than that. But, so that's the idea there, that we would put that in a policy so that people understand that, if you come asking for public money, we're gonna get in your business, because you're getting in our business at that point. And I've literally had people be like, well, I'm not gonna give you that stuff. And it's like, there's an easy solution here. Just don't ask for public dollars. Do the project on your own, and you don't have to reveal anything. And I say that, obviously we have a lot of, public, like sunshine law and things like that. There are, they can enter into non-disclosure agreements with certain of the consultants and share information that way that, shouldn't put it in the, doesn't put it in the public stream, and it shouldn't be in the public stream because it might be proprietary. We wouldn't want someone coming forward to have to reveal all of their secrets. We don't want the colonel have to bring the recipe in, right, to get an incentive here, and then everybody else has it, or the formula to Coke or something like that, right? So obviously there's proprietary information that should be protected for applicants to come forward, okay? Okay, here's the last 5 of our 10 commandments here. So, some types of incentives may be favored by the Board of Aldermen over others. That makes sense, right? We learned all about incentives at the last meeting. We know that if someone does a CID, that CID, its revenue source is to create its own tax, right? It's not actually using city money at all. You're just providing a pathway for the developer to place a tax on their own development that, arguably could create some sort of a competitive barrier. Like if a citizen, wants to buy, whatever, a box of rocks, and the box of rocks in the CID is 1% more than the box of rocks someplace else, that's a potential competitive disadvantage, But the people who did it without the incentive get that, and the people who did it with the incentive and got their parking lot paved or painted or whatever because of it was a CID, that was a cost of doing business. One way or the other, when the other business paves its parking lot, it pays for it out of private funds, and what does it do? It raises its prices, maybe a penny, who knows, 1 cent, 1%. So anyway, what I would say is that, it's a good policy to say that some incentives may be favored more than others because those incentives aren't truly taxpayer dollars that are existing, whether it would be in your general fund already or it's taking away from taxes that the city would earn because of this happening, but instead it's creating a new tax for that area that is like the CID or a TDD, that's their money, in the end when that happens. You're just providing a pathway, a conduit for them to do that. Any arguments there? You guys are a super agreeable group tonight. Maybe it's just easy material, I don't know. Okay, the next bullet point is applicants must obtain their own legal counsel, okay? We talked about this a little bit last time. I have worked on dozens and dozens and dozens of projects throughout the state, and I've seen anything from, the guy from Georgia who came up by himself and just asked us to build the project to, having, very sophisticated legal counsel come down out of, Kansas City or St. Louis or, something like that. And these guys, and they're guys that I know because they've done a million TIF projects all over the place and whatever. I will tell you flat out that when I'm dealing with someone who's done 10 TIFs, like I have, it goes so much smoother, right? It's just an easier process. And it's just so much more efficient. you know, what happens many times if the applicant comes in and they're unsophisticated themselves, or they don't have sophisticated counsel, somebody who really understands what we're doing, we end up spending so much time explaining to them how everything works. They don't really get it, and then we have to, you know, do rework, and then, you know, things, you know, we make agreements and then things get changed, and, you know, it just, they're not speaking the language. And it makes the projects way more expensive and way more inefficient. And so what I would suggest to you is like, you know, if an applicant is serious about, you know, asking you for, you know, potentially millions of dollars, they should be willing to spend a few of those bucks on their own counsel. And by the way, that is also a reimbursable project cost, you know, for most incentives projects. Okay? All projects are required to have a preliminary funding agreement, which covers the city's costs for consideration of the project. I touched on this a couple times, touched on it earlier tonight. This is that provision that says it is not fair for the citizens of Branson to pay for you guys to look into, you know, whether someone's dream is really a nightmare, okay? And the preliminary funding agreement provides a way for you to say, again, to an applicant, if you're serious about asking us for millions of dollars, then you're going to be willing to also pay for our consultants to look at this, so we have a third party who isn't tied to you saying whether or not your information is good. Because your people that you're paying are going to say, it's the best information ever. Look at how cute my baby is. And so again, that burden shouldn't be on your citizens to pay for that kind of a look, right? And like their own counsel, that if the project is successful, then the cost that they spend on their counsel and the cost that they spend on your consultants is also something that could be reimbursed through the project itself. You know, it becomes a line item in the application. Okay, so the next bullet point is all incentives received are subject to annual appropriation from the Board of Aldermen. Okay, this is in part, it is it's kind of a constitutional requirement as well. So what this is saying is, and this is not the same as an annual appropriation pledge per se. Like if we're not talking about you guys, you know, like if a deal comes in and then you would say, you know, we're going to back, if you come short on your revenues, we're going to pay for it, right? What we're saying is that we're going to do this deal, but legally and technically, to the extent that, you know, revenues in future years aren't available, that the Board of Aldermen at that time has the ability to make a decision about to make a decision in the budget about paying that, right? And so I talked a lot about the MAMTech project, I think, in the last one, you know, where the city in that circumstance had authorized bonds to be issued and debt service to be paid. And there was a question on that one, you know, when the time came and the project fell short and the city, that was a pledge of the city's money, that the city had the choice, you know, the Board of Aldermen in power at that time, whoever the elected officials were, had the ability, because we can't bind future bodies to certain financial decisions, you know, that would, you know, those are legislative acts,
So revoking a TIF, is that what you're talking about?
There is a process statutorily for that. So, you know, there are certain things though that, you know, and there may be some, like, for example, maybe this is the best example of how this kind of a term would be utilized would be like a sales tax reimbursement agreement, okay? Sales tax reimbursement agreement doesn't come with the trappings of like TIF that has a very specific procedural, you know, thing. It won't really affect a CID because it's not city money, that's CID money, right? But on a sales tax reimbursement agreement, this would be something that really comes into play, because it's essentially saying that, you know, that if the project throws off, you know, money for parks and money for, you know, general fund and money for capital improvements and money for transportation, you know, based on what your sales taxes are, that a future board might be able to say, you know, we're not going to be able to do, you know, the transportation anymore, or you've finished up the transportation components of your project, and so, you know, we're not going to appropriate money for that anymore. We're just going to stick with the other things that are still available, okay? All right, the last of our shalls and shall nots is the city will require reports and/or audits to ensure that incentives are being used appropriately. Again, this gets back to, our responsibility to our constituents. Not only when we make decisions to grant incentives are we needing to be good stewards of public funds, but we need to make sure that whatever deal we got into, that, and again, if a TIF is approved in 2024, it might not even become active until 2034, and then it has another 23 years on top of that before it would run out. I'm probably not going to be here at that time. You all, may be here, you may not be in office, you might still be in the community, but in the end, one way or the other, we need to have continuity through the entire long term of the incentive to make sure that that developer has a responsibility to come back and maybe every year give a report. Yes, we said we were going to, build a project for $40 million, and we're happy to say that as we stand here now on the anniversary of it, we're 95% complete. It ended up being $42 million investment in the community, and things are going great. We're looking forward to opening soon, and the cash registers will be ringing. And then next year they come back and say we opened, on time, and in fact we're hitting above, I'm giving the rosy picture, right? You always hope it's that report where they say, we're hitting above projections and this thing's going to pay off 3 years earlier than we thought, or something like that. But, to give people an expectation up front is that, you're asking for a long-term relationship from the city, and in turn, you're going to be a partner for a long term, and you're going to be coming back to report on your progress. And because you're utilizing our citizens' dollars to do this.
So, Joe, I don't know that we're getting those reports from the existing TIFs that we have out in the world now, are we?
So it would depend on whether that information was put in your redevelopment agreements earlier. I know, I'm pretty certain, like on the aquarium, we're doing that work right now. It has a 5-year look back, so I don't think on that one we've gotten to the point yet where they've had to do that. But what Baker Tilly is doing, your financial advisors are doing, is rather than waiting till 5 years and hoping that everybody saved all the receipts in a shoebox under the bed, that they're actually reporting every year. In fact, earlier today I got from their lawyer, I got a list of they copied me on what they sent to Baker Tilly, their costs, and so that Baker Tilly can stay on top of it year after year, and we like that that they were working with us. They're being very cooperative about that because they don't have to necessarily less than 5 years, but it does help us to be able to see the progress as they go along, and it can send up a red flag earlier if there is a problem. We're able to see it in year 2 as opposed to waiting until year 5 is over. So anyway, that's.
You familiar if Branson Landing has any of that?
I worked on it like 15 years ago. I'm not familiar enough with it today to tell you, what it does or doesn't have in it, but, they're, certainly, we could go back through and take a look at the agreements just to see what the requirements are, and, if they're not being, met, we could certainly, put some information together and maybe send a letter over to the developer to, make a request that, they do that and start doing that on a regular basis. So I see
You got that,
Kathy's
Kathy?
furiously writing over there, so I feel a new project in my future.
Hey, Joe, how do we make sure that it's metrics that we're comfortable with that we're judging these by? So for instance, there's a lot of controversy based on the number of tourists that come into the city of Branson every year, right? I think that's one example of we might want to have our own number, or might want to have our own way of coming to a number like that. Or for instance, how do we avoid a developer coming back and sort of throwing our goals back in our face? So for instance, affordable housing, right? Well, you said for years, do this affordable housing, but it wasn't really affordable. It really wasn't what we were. So, I mean, is that just how specific you get in crafting your policy and your policy handbook, essentially?
Yeah. So, yes, I mean, you can get down to, detail, again, when we're doing these projects though, all we have is a crystal ball basically, and all you can do then is try to measure, so first and foremost, you have consultants already. There are other, consultants out there, that's, and I even know, like, when I've dealt with projects with Baker Tilly, and it'll be like a very specific area, well, actually, I can tell you, I remember this, from the aquarium. Aquariums are a different animal, but they work differently than, like maybe Dolly Stampede or, something like that. And so there's a lot less of them out there. So I remember in that case that Baker Tilly actually reached out to consultants who do work on aquariums, and they got some additional information at that time from consultants in the area that were very specifically looking at those types of projects, okay? So I think to answer your question is we do the best that we can to get the best consultants possible, because, in our job as staff, like top to bottom, if we're talking about the public works budget to, an economic development incentive plan, like our job as staff is to give you the information so that you can make the most informed decision possible, right? And like, I will always tell you, we talked about this in the roles and responsibilities training. If we're not doing that, right? If you don't have, you don't feel comfortable and you don't have the information possible, that's why you should, as soon as you get those packets, crack them open, take a look at it. Do I have questions about this? Because these are the types of things that we send, an email immediately to the mayor, to Kathy, to say, hey, I'm looking at this. I'm a little concerned. I don't really understand this piece of it, or I feel like there's a piece of information missing. Let them know as soon as possible, so that by the time the meeting rolls around, we're in a position to give you a good solid answer, on that. And so I guess, it all kind of fits together that way. Sorry, I felt like I kind of took a big circle there, but it is all related. So does that help? Okay.
Hello?
Hello, did you raise your hand?
Man, my arm is about to wear out. It's been about 15 minutes. So I had the same question before the mayor asked, and you did answer. The question was, is it currently required that we get these yearly reports? And I believe your answer was only if it's set up in that particular deal. So are you suggesting, and I would be all in favor of having that clause in every one of our incentive deals, that we do get these yearly reports and from these different developers that we have incentives with?
Yeah, that last bullet point is all about that. Like, if you guys are okay with that being in your policy, that's that signal to us from the standpoint of, you guys set the policy, right? Roles and responsibilities. You guys set the policy, and now staff says, okay, this is what they want, and we work hard then to put, those terms in a contract, And, sometimes this is what can happen, right? So sometimes we'll be in a negotiation, with an applicant, and we try to get all these fights out of the way before it even comes to you, right? And sometimes, we get where we need to be, and sometimes we don't. A lot of times in the staff report or in the presentation, I may stand here and say, mayor and board, we attempted to get this term from this applicant and they refused, so the best they would do is this. So, I'm presenting that to you. We got to a point where everybody could agree on terms, but we didn't love this one. And if you don't love this one either, you can vote this down, right? Or, you can tell us, go back to that applicant and tell them, we're not approving it without that term, and man, that's some leverage at that point, but, to get, it's one of those few situations where you probably, remember I said that as soon as you start to take the first procedural steps, your leverage starts to drop. There's probably one point right at the very end where the tail curls up a little bit, where your leverage gets strong, because if you're going to kill the deal or not, that's a place where it can happen. So, but
Yeah, well,
yeah, so
I'm sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
No, I totally agree with that. And, based off the last deal we just had, one may perceive me as an anti-incentivizer, which I am not. I just want to make sure that we're very thorough and very careful, and it is it is a project that's going to be beneficial to the community and also generate sales revenue. And I just don't want to be 15 years down the road people going, well, look what they did there, and that was a bad deal. So I'm all for any precautions and all the stuff we can put in up front to head off any of those things happening.
Fair enough.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think we've got some great direction on that, so, you'll see, and we have a general requirements section, and then, to the extent that it's more important in certain of the incentives, we may put some, more specific language, like for TIF, for example, that one by law requires but for. And back to, kind of the question about the reporting, there are some statutory reporting requirements that developers have to do, so we need to double check that those are being met as well. So that's something that we can help you with. I think just over time and with transitions and stuff like that, it kind of has, maybe, gotten pushed to a back corner and it needs to come back forward again, so. Okay. Okay, so I think, so that's all I have for my presentation, and then we've got your slideshow, correct? That is, okay, and I'm gonna walk through that one, okay. All right, so, drum roll please. We're gonna shift now from kind of talking about those types of things to, kind of the information that you all got, speaking with your constituents over the last couple of weeks, and, the information that came out in the survey. So we'll start that, and then, this may be even more interactive in this piece of it, kind of, so you have an opportunity to see, there aren't any, like, no one's vote is identified in this, right? It's completely anonymous. I appreciate the fact that all 7 of you, so all 6 aldermen and the mayor, did participate, and we're going to see the results now of the survey, and then we'll see what kind of discussion that will maybe spur. So I'm just going to dive in then. Okay, so the question 1 that was sent out says, in terms of setting a timeline for the city's economic development priorities, what do you consider short-term in number of years? And the options given were 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or other. And you can see that, really nearly 3/4 of you came back with 2 years as being the short term. So that's pretty resounding. So I think for us, from that standpoint, in goal setting, we should all be focusing then on, using 2 years as that term. So anybody have any further comments on short term? Okay, question number 2. In terms of setting a timeline for city's economic development priorities, what do you consider midterm? And the options there were 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10. And you can see again, 85% of you, even more, felt like 5 years is a good number to utilize for setting our goals and priorities for the midterm. So, again, with that resounding kind of, response, that's where we will head with your policy as we go forward. Questions on that? Question number 3. In terms of setting a timeline for the city's economic development priorities, what do you consider as long-term in the number of years? Choices being 10, 15, 20, 30, and 50 years. And here you had, nearly 3/4 of you at 10. You can see that, looking out, really, anything beyond 20 years wasn't even considered from that standpoint. And so, we would be inclined to, focus on 10 again with that kind of overwhelming response from the board as, kind of setting priorities. So now we can start to kind of line things up in columns as we think about what your priorities are, as to kind of, what we'll do on that. So again, any comments on 10 years being kind of the long term? It actually makes a lot of sense when you think about terms of aldermen as well, because you're, at that point, you're talking about, really 5 terms for an alderman. Mayor, you're also 2-year terms, is that right? Yeah, okay. So 5 terms is pretty good long run, for real, so. Okay, question number 4 was, what do you think the city of Branson's top short term, so, in short term, we can now start saying 2 years. Sorry, let me get caught up here. So what would our 2-year goals be? Here you can see there was a, kind of, again, another kind of more, I won't say it's overwhelming, but it's a pretty good, you guys were almost 2/3 saying that redevelopment of vacant and blighted property is what should be, a top priority in the next 2 years, okay? Of course, that was followed with availability of workforce housing at 28.57, and then really the only other thing that was even considered for short-term was creating a 12-month economy at 14.29%. So, again, I think you guys are speaking loud and clear. We heard from constituents as well that, that infill is pretty important, and we'll get into some additional details in this area, but, with focusing kind of on where and a little bit on what as we go through the survey. Anybody have any comments on that or want to discuss it any further?
Clay, is your hand up?
No, sir, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
His hand's looking a little yellow. I mean, he should probably have that checked out. All right, so question number 5, what do you think should be the City of Branson's top midterm economic development goal? And so, again, keep in mind, from our earlier slides, we learned that midterm is kind of that 5-year goal is what we're looking at. Now this one, kind of a photo finish here, right? So, as you look at it, we had 3 responses that garnered a 28.57. So there's kind of a 3-way tie for first on this one. And those are creating a 12-month economy, redevelopment of vacant blighted property, and availability of workforce housing. Y'all feeling a pattern at all?
Yeah, it's the same 3 things.
It kind of is,
Yeah.
So clearly important to you, on these topics because it kind of, came through, in that. So who knows, like maybe now that we've gotten a little further down the road, kind of saying we know what the timeframes are, we kind of know what the issues are, and again, if there is something that you didn't see on this list, throw it out, like if there's something out there. And again, and there's nothing wrong with having a 2-year and a 5-year goal be the same thing, right? Because, it may take that time. This stuff doesn't necessarily turn on a dime. We didn't get, in some of these conditions, overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. So, that's of importance. The other thing to keep in mind is we've been talking about, as you set your goals, right? And you have folks who are coming along and they're starting to check the list. Now, for redevelopment of vacant blighted property, how do we go about tackling that? So you guys have given us that direction. Now, as staff, what we can do for you is we can go out and get an inventory of the vacant blighted properties out there, okay? And maybe we find a place where there is a greater concentration than others, right? And that would say, okay, if we have a developer who comes to us and is asking for incentives to do redevelopment of a vacant or blighted property that happens to fall within this area, that gets like 100% of whatever we can offer on that, right? And then if they're not in the area, we could actually map this out for you and say, like if it falls outside of your focus area, we're not going to give incentives for that right now, because you know what? You could treat certain areas of the city as more important. That really falls in that short term, 2 years is where we want to focus. And then as we get that up and running, it starts to, the idea is, right, is to prime a pump here. If you get development working in those areas where you have a concentration of blight and it's starting to come back alive, then other developers start to see it and they're like, oh, this area is coming to life. It's got, energy. I want to be there too. Maybe those folks don't get the incentive, right? Because somebody else already took that risk to get it up and running. We talked about that. And now you can shift your focus off of that area and put it more on another area, right? And now, is that in the first 2 years? Does it come in the first 5 years as a midterm? You see how we can start to utilize this information now and start to really create, that goal-focused, priorities-focused economic development. And then, and I can tell you, looking, at what you're trying to accomplish here, it's probably 353 or TIF or maybe even Chapter 100, but 353 or TIF are going to be your, right off the bat, that's your blight remediation tools. So there may be ways to utilize that depending on the scale of the project. large project, if you have a developer that comes in and says, I see this concentration, I would like to take down all 15 of these properties and make something, really cool here, that's probably a TIF project. Okay, and we start looking at that and how does that, improve things. If people are going to come in and do it one project at a time, one parcel at a time, that may be more like a 353 type incentive. But, again, so now we understand how the tools work, and when we see the goals we're trying to achieve and we have an applicant coming in saying, I want to do this thing that you really need, then we've got this tool that we can plug into that. Okay? So any questions or any further discussion, again, these are kind of neck and neck. So, but, again, I don't have a problem with y'all having, multiple goals, on that. We may, at some other point come back and say, we want some additional direction from you as to, if you had to pick one of these as being the favorite kid, which one is it? Like if we wanted to tier it and say, we want to, or, we would do it in a different way and we would say, here's an area for this type of incentive, okay?
Hey, Joe.
Yes.
So like, do y'all have a process in place as far as like so you keep saying like the process of staff, and maybe this question may be to Alex or whatever the case may be, but is there a plan to, in 6 months or to a year, to come back to us with these kind of things? Or is it a case-by-case basis, like when it comes up, or?
So I think once we have the policy adopted, which I would hope we can be at in, no more than about 4 or 6 more weeks and, something like that, where your policy is in place, then you guys have provided the direction, right? You've done that role, that responsibility as elected officials to say, here's the big picture, staff, go get her done, right? And so at that point, that's when, Kathy and Alex and the department heads, they all start to get together and say, what is our role in this? What are our parts? How do we brainstorm a way to help the board reach these goals, And so then we maybe put together some sort of a work plan that implements your policy, and we could be bringing that back. Now, is that going to be, 2 months after you approve the policy? I don't know. Sometimes it's application driven too. There may be an application that's just waiting out there, kind of like the bass under the water, and as soon as the lure hits, bam, and here they are. And so we're already, like maybe working on a priority that we knew was out there, but we didn't have a solution for it, but here it is, and it's almost shocking to me sometimes, how often that is truly the case. One of my great project that I did in Grain Valley one year, the city didn't have any solutions, but they knew they had to come up with $8 million in matching funds, and they went off and they started their own TIF. And then I'll be darned if a developer didn't come along and say, you know what, I want to do a project there. And we're like, well, here you go. It just worked out that way, So anyway, I don't know if I can definitively give you information, but I am certain that we can, once we have your direction, right, we can start then coming back to you with very regularly and say, here are the things we've got in motion. Here are some things, you can expect to see this at your April, your first meeting in April, bringing that forward, or your first meeting in May, or, whatever the case may be, and, we'll be getting on down the road. But the policy in place helps tremendously because it already starts to drive, as applicants are coming in, we've got that direction as to, which direction to start, pushing them. And, it may turn out that we want to start on, a policy over here, but then the application comes in for something there. And, so we start, like working out the details of how you get the incentives approved, so.
Where are you at your stage of presentation? The only reason I'm asking.
There are 5 more questions in the survey, and that's it.
Okay, let me get through those, and, because I've got some audience input that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to move on from question 5 then into 6. So question 6 was, what do you think the city of Branson's top long-term economic development goal should be? In this circumstance, we had about almost 43% saying that creating a 12-month economy is the most important. And remember, this is a 20-year goal based on your decision on what long-term should be.
10
I'm
years.
sorry. Did I write that down wrong? I did, sorry. 10 years. Five terms, we talked about that. Sorry. So 10-year goal is a 12-month economy. And then a fairly, within reach, second place was that redevelopment of blighted property. So it showed up in short-term, mid-term, and long-term, one way or another. And so maybe if we're able to get something, pulled out pretty quickly to help, create a program for that, maybe that, it falls out of your long-term because you're already knocking it out at the short and midterm or something like that. I think, part of this is, remember, I said from the beginning, you're gonna set this direction, right? And everybody's gonna be rowing in that direction, but, as we go, things are gonna happen that, you're gonna wanna, this is a living, breathing document. We are not gonna create this policy and set it on a shelf. It is gonna be, well-worn and on the front of everybody's desk, okay?
Because I think what we're going to find, Joe, is that it may be quicker to achieve creating the 12-month economy. It may just take the idea that just stay open in January and February in the same way that some of our entertainers in the past just decided to stay open in August, right? So as we examine these, we may find that our long-term goals we can accomplish quickly, and vice versa, kind of thing.
Well, and as you go, I mean, I think it's been true as we've kind of gone along, is the more you talk about this yourselves, right, and the more this is out there, the more other people in the community are going to be talking about it, and I can see you guys, like the juices are starting to flow a little bit. I'm thinking about how we can do this stuff, and people in the community are probably sitting there doing the exact same thing right now, going, okay, I see what they're trying to do here. I want to be a part of that. And so, and that's great, right? We love that kind of synergy, because now, we're doing it right at that point, right? We're working with our constituents, to get what it is that this community needs, and we're all headed in the right direction. So I get goosebumps talking about that kind of stuff. This is, I geek out on this city law stuff, so. Okay, so I think, let's see, so long-term, 10 years we covered those, so 12-month, and then blight infill. So question 7. Please rank the following locations as priority areas of development you'd like to see in Branson over the next 5 years. So again, this one, had a little bit, closer. So in this one, the champ on this one was to focus on the 76 corridor. And the way this one worked with the responses, we actually did a scoring on that. And so the scoring for the 76 corridor ended up with an average of a 6.57 out of 7. Being of that importance, with that being the number one priority for 71% of you from that standpoint. So, 76 corridor, important. The close second on that was historic downtown. And that you had 28.57% of you said that should be number 1, and 57.14% of you said that should be priority 2. So that came out with an average score of 6.14 out of 7. So again, a very, you can see it on the bar graph there that it's, was a very close second. And then third in that circumstance, based on your survey, was the Branson Meadows, kind of Gretna Road area. You had 42.86% of you said that should be a third priority. At 28.5 said that should be a number 2 priority. So it came in at 4.57 out of 7. On that one. So those are kind of, again, based on, your survey, that's where we were. So again, this is fuel for conversation. This is fuel for thought. This is fuel for further communications with your constituents, and, making sure that as we go, we refine this, but this, based off of, just this simple survey that we did this week with all of you after you've had that opportunity for the last month to talk with your constituents, is where things are kind of coming out. The next one you can see is a little more neck and neck. This is question number 8, is please rank the following sectors or types of development you would like to see in Branson over the next 5 years. So your front runner on this one is actually to work in with tourism attractions. That ended up with a 4.57 out of 7. So 42% of you, almost 43% of you said that should be priority. Priority 1, and then 14.29% of you said priority 2, and then another 42.8% of you said that should be priority 4. So, but it did end up with the highest averaging across that. Number two was retail development. It came out with a 4.29 rating, and so again, almost all of you had that ranked as a number 1, 2, or 3, with 2% being, third ranked was 42.86% on that one. And then third place on that was residential developments. That ended up with a 4.14 as a weighted average. The residential, that was a number 1 priority for 28.57% of you, and a number 3 for 42.86. So those were, again, much more neck and neck. So, again, that may be another area that, as we go and we refine a little bit more, you may have some further discussions and see if there's an area of this that you would want to kind of bring to the forefront as being a little bit higher priority than others, or do you want to work on all of them at the same time? Because those three were very tight together.
Joe, in summary, I think we want them all done. They're all priorities in our short-term goal. So send staff off to do that and report back.
Is that really prioritizing then? Okay, now we're going to have to start everything all over again because of what you said. We're going to rewind the tape. No, I'm just kidding. All right, question number 9. This is excuse me. Please rank the following priorities as it relates to economic development in the city of Branson. Here, our number 1 is investment to develop the gateway entrance of the 76 corridor, so the segment 1. So essentially, for those of you who aren't familiar, that is the segment like right when you get off 65 and your choice is to go downtown or go out towards the strip, it starts right there. And so that is, it is actually included in the CID that's out there, but I think that, like that one has been kind of, honestly like a low priority of that group, or not that group, but, the CID as far as projects, but
Yeah, actually,
something that can bring back.
That area has not been included, has not been brought into
Oh, it's
the
not
CID.
in yet?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry, I mistook that. So it actually starts a little further to the west.
starts around Fritz's.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you. I knew that there were at least future plans for that, if I remember
Yes,
correctly.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's
So
in
it
the
just hasn't been brought
long-term
in, so-
plan. It's just the first 6
Yeah,
segments.
which, for those of you who've been around, like, for example, when the historic downtown Branson CID was created, several years later, it was expanded, almost doubled in size to come further up towards,
That's right.
The other side of that interchange. So another process could be, you could undergo another process with a petition to add, that segment.
That's the
and,
plan.
and that would be, yep. So there's a perfect use of CID incentives to establish one of the goals. So we can already start to marry one up, on this one. So, and it's really cool that we already have, a lot of work already, put in by a lot of people on that project, and, things are really moving forward. Like I've personally seen, I think we just were I was just talking about this back there, I think we started as the interim a year ago, this, next month, which is tomorrow. To see how much progress that has been made on that project in the last, 9 months really has been phenomenal, and just really appreciate the folks at the CID and all of their cooperation in that as we've gone, and city staff has really made that a priority, so it's cool to see, so. Okay, so Gateway to 76, that segment 1 area was number 1. Number 2 is new investment in 76 corridor. And then number 3 is expansion of sports tourism industry type attractions and venues, which I think is kind of like, trying to get, more, like if you're looking for a 12-month economy in sports, you could actually, have a situation where you've got, like maybe, folks that are building facilities where people could do, indoor volleyball, tournaments all year round, or some of those indoor sports, that would be a way, because I remember, for the longest time, we were making multiple trips per year, to come down for my daughter for dance, and that was a thing. And that was always inside too, so it could be done, various times of the year. We'd start the season in February usually, and so there were opportunities to do that. And that tends to be an area that is just exploding kind of across the country. Is, you know, there are a lot of just very seriously sports-focused opportunities that are out there. I think that, you know, would be a great opportunity for Branson to kind of look at, you know, and now this is popping up as one of your priorities, and so maybe you can marry, you know, a couple goals together here and get some things going. So it's pretty exciting.
Joe, I think shortly, I'm not sure what shortly means, short-term goal, but shortly I think the board is going to be asked to approve a feasibility study to expand our convention center.
Oh, wow, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
we've put out the RFP, they've scored them and all that. So-
Awesome.
So that's in
Yeah.
the works.
I think that'll be great. You know, and the more, you know, conventions you can bring, you know, again, those can be things that are year round and start to add to that 12-month economy. So smart thinking on that, and man, you know, to have that, you know, helps to have jobs year round, and you know, we get that housing built. I mean, it all starts to come together, right? So, okay, I believe this is the last question that we're going to cover here, and that would be, please rank the following priorities as it relates to economic development in the city of Branson. And so that is, oh shoot, did I do that? Oh, this was just kind of a different slice, different angle on the questions. Okay, so the question, you know how sometimes when surveys, you know, they'll ask a question and they'll ask a question in kind of a similar way to see if it changes the answer at all. This is kind of like one of those, right? So this is, please rank the following priorities as it relates to economic development in the city of Branson. This one came back as number one, being reinvestment in the 76 corridor to reduce blighted areas, right? So 76, clearly a focus, you know, when it comes to what you guys are looking for there, from a redevelopment, you know, and blighted. There's also redevelopment of existing vacant and or blighted hotels and motels came out as number 2 in this survey, and redevelopment of existing attractions, theaters, including vacant attraction and theaters, came out as number 3. So pretty strong. Like when you go back and look through all of the slides, there's a lot of focus on 76. There's a lot of focus on infill, you know, and it ended up, you know, and remember that blighted, you know, infill kind of, you know, blight reduction showed up in short-term, long-term, or mid-term, and long-term. So, again, see a pattern? So clearly, you know, from staff's perspective, you know, putting together a policy, hearing you loud and clear that, you know, some sort of a, you know, an infill project is probably the first place that we should start, you know, on that, you know, as a short-term goal. And as we'll get the framework put together in the policy to make sure you guys are good with that direction. But we're already starting to think of ideas of how we can even carry it out for you before you even get it approved. Like it's pretty clear, you know, which direction you're pointing. So, anyway, so that is it for the questions for that survey. And
So I think it's important to share with the citizens very quickly that, at least for the way I answered this survey, I'm thinking about the questions and what I would like to see, but I'm also thinking about like if it's able to be accomplished, right? So like on the one that had industrial last place, I don't know that we don't want to see industrial in town. Right. It's just what are the realistic nature of drawing something like that, or the creation of higher wages. You know, I think we all would love to see that. It's just as far as we're looking at the package that we have in front of us as free market, you know, kind of stewards of this economy, and what can we achieve. So I just want to put that out there. This isn't just that we're saying no to some of these ideas, at least the way I answered as an alderman. So.
Where are you at in your presentation? Well, it's not a trick question, except it's not like your number 10 trick question.
Mr. Mayor, before, there was already a public comment offering, and we were supposed to be given an opportunity to report what we got back from our constituents, and we didn't have an opportunity to do that. Would that be advisable at this time? For a friend.
You asking for Clay? Yeah, I'm going to recommend we take a short recess and then come back.
I gotta go to the back.
So. So I'm going to call this meeting back to order. Joe, thank you very much for that, right? What it took was a lot of discussion and put it into a format for action steps. Thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.
I've had a few people ask about making comments, and we do want to hear everybody's comments. What I'm going to suggest is allow us to go through these next couple items so we can kind of wrap up these discussions we're in, and then I'll ask anybody to come up and comment. So at this time, the board will discuss the findings that we've heard from our constituents. And I believe our findings would have been reflective in our surveys. I'll start off and say, excuse me, I didn't hear but from a handful of people. The comments were the rock issue. This is not in priority. I heard more comments about 76 and workforce housing. Initiatives for existing businesses. One comment was they didn't think the city should provide any incentives, and the 12-month economy. So, would you share what you've heard from your constituents?
Yeah, and, I was kind of sharing a little bit ago, like, this is, gosh, it's more of a daunting task than I initially thought it would be, once you kind of get into the weeds of it. I mean, with Joe's two presentations, and then, this presentation, the Ten Commandments of thou shalt not, or thou shalt kind of thing. But even reaching out to community leaders and business owners and people that live and work in the community, a lot of people had a lot of different opinions. And what I attempted to do in a statement was just kind of synthesize like everything I gathered, like from the previous meetings, from talking with people in the community and things like that, and it just the back end of what I knew about it. So if you guys would kind of bear with me, I'll just kind of read this because I really wanted to try to hit as many high points as I could. Specifically based on like kind of the incentives and what people were really feeling and looking for when we kind of make these decisions. So in creating a fair and equitable economy program for Branson involves considering various new and existing businesses, the incentives that will stimulate growth while ensuring fairness along all participants. My statements tonight will be outlining key components of such a program, focusing on supporting existing businesses, attracting new investments, and fostering that 12-month sustainable economy in our environment. To begin with, this Branson economic program should aim to incentivize existing businesses to expand and thrive. One of the primary strategies is maybe to offer tax credits or incentives for businesses that demonstrate growth in employment, tourism, or tax revenue. This will encourage businesses to invest in their operations, create jobs, and contribute to the local economy. Additionally, these programs may include mentorships and training programs for small businesses to improve their operations and competitiveness. And a little off script here, I think that's very important because, as we look at what's going on, not just in our town, but even, around it, best practices have to really be installed in all of our industries and all the verticals that we kind of represent. And, there are just, some businesses that just kind of do it okay, and there's some businesses that really shine. And, if we're going to be that economic juggernaut, all of our businesses need to shine. And so I think, having those mentorships available will be very, very good. In attracting new businesses, I think our program may offer tax breaks or subsidies for companies that choose to establish their presence in Branson. These incentives can include reduced corporate taxes, property tax abatements, or infrastructure improvements. The mayor talked about rocks and things like that to support the new businesses. By making it attractive for new businesses to set up shop in Branson, our program is aimed at diversifying our local economy and creating new job opportunities. In terms of equity, I think our program must ensure that incentives are accessible to businesses of all sizes and sectors. Small business in particular, are provided with support and resources to compete with larger corporations. This may include access to low-interest loans, which I kind of talked to some bankers that kind of like maybe suggested something like that. They have some local programs that could kind of help some of those small businesses. Business development services and networking opportunities. Furthermore, and this is something that Joe hit on, the program must emphasize transparency and accountability in its administration. Clear guidelines are established for businesses to qualify for the incentives, and regular audits are conducted to ensure compliance. And that just really reassures everyone that we're not just haphazardly using taxpayer money and not getting results in return. And then in conclusion, this Branson Economic Program must be designed to create a fair and equitable business environment that supports both existing businesses, new investment. By offering a range of incentives and support services, I think this program's primary aim to stimulate the economy, create jobs, and foster a strong economy here in Branson will ensure the success of our community today and in the future. And, you know, again, so this was just a statement I synthesized from the constituents I talked to, business owners I talked to, and other leaders in the community. And so that's what I tried to bring you tonight, was just that statement, kind of brushing over that. It was a little redundant on some of the 10 commandments, but, you know, again, I think, you know, everyone has a pulse of what they're feeling out there and kind of what they're wanting. So that's my statement.
Oh, thank you very much, Ralph. Kathy?
Thank you, Ralph. Very good comments. Couple of things I want to just be mindful of, which is thank you for acknowledging and reminding us to focus on programs specifically for existing businesses in Branson, and we're currently working on that as well. So we're not just sitting back at City Hall and waiting for you all to tell us. We've got a pretty good feel on some of this stuff already, so we've been working already, having those conversations. And then the point that you brought up about the importance of training and teaching business owners how to be better business owners, I'm going to pass those comments on to the chamber, because I think the chamber and actually Taney County Partnership, I think, could do a lot to be an educational resource where city government wouldn't necessarily be in that business. But I think those are good points to bring up so we can share those with our partners. So thank you.
Marshall, anything to share?
I think the main thing that I heard, Mr. Mayor, all had to do with housing, essentially. And while I concur with that, I just want to make sure that we embark on those tasks specifically with a clear head, kind of dispensing with some of the talking points of what has been in the past, but making sure that if we are trying to incentivize affordable housing projects, what is affordable, what's the access that they have, as far as transportation was brought up. So, but that was the bulk of the things that I heard from my constituents, so.
Thank you. Chuck, do you have anything you want to add?
I'd just like to say thank you for putting this together, and for this administration. Kathy, you're doing a great job with this. I would love to see us put something together for affordable housing, maybe some sort of open for affordable housing like we do open for business. I know we have realtors, real estate brokers, investors out there that'd be happy to sit on a board and help people and bring people in. And we got Jonas to lean on for that too. I would just like to see something like that put in place possibly.
Great. Clay, I saw your hand was up.
No, I just wanted, I was very pleased to see that it looked like all of our goals kind of fell pretty well in line, and that was encouraging to, to see that we're all in agreement with a lot of the goals moving forward. 76 corridor, of course, affordable housing, and doing something with these old worn down hotels and stuff. I'm excited to see those on the top of the priority sheet, and I'm excited that we're moving forward. And like Chuck said, thanks to Kathy and the staff and Joe for putting this together tonight. It was very informative. The last 3 meetings have been really informative, and I appreciate it. So thank y'all.
Very nice. Ruth?
The majority of the folks that I spoke with really focused on the the blight and the vacant buildings and wanted that cleaned up because it gives a huge facelift to the city and the existing businesses. A lot of people said that they were not aware of all the tools that are available, and they would just like some open communication, maybe advertising, maybe more information put out, and to just to have the transparency out there. Others were the existing businesses that we have. They really are the backbone of this city, and just to provide information to them of what is available.
Great. Cody?
Yeah, I didn't I didn't have a ton of conversations, but the conversations I had just were all excitement. I had folks reaching out to me and met some folks that hadn't met prior, and it was just kind of a general sense of excitement of, we think this is, a good idea. We want to get behind this. We want to see. I had somebody call me this week. It's like, hey, I've already got something that, I want to see if I can, what this might look like. And so I think there's a lot of excitement. I think there's a lot of momentum from these meetings. I've got a meeting set next week with some folks, and I think there's particularly some interest. The two things I've heard is housing, like everybody else, and then there was also some pretty good interest in that phase one of 76. Kind of like we talked about at the last meeting. What can we do there to get something going? And I said this last time. It's chicken or the egg, right? It's not in the CID because it's not generating enough sales tax. Well, how do we get it to generate sales tax to where it's enticing to be in the CID? And I think that's going to take the city probably, doing something proactive and not waiting on somebody to, to come in. So those were kind of the two big things. But just overall, it was just excitement with the opportunities that this is going to present, and just to, to not let that go away, to keep that momentum going. So.
Very nice. Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So thank you for coming in, obviously, the past 3 meetings. I know that's an extra set of meetings for you all, but I think we've had some really good conversation about where we need to head as a city. We talk about next steps. We have some options, right? We've heard, you've obviously reached out to your constituents, had conversations. We've had 3 meetings here. We've opened up public comment. I think we've heard a lot of great feedback tonight, right, of what next steps might look like. But I'd like to have your direction, back to administration and city staff on as another idea is to also do a community survey, something that we can do as a mailer out to all the residents and businesses here within the city limits. Ask them, I think, a lot to do with economic development, but also getting a little bit of feedback on some of their priorities as well, to make sure we're doing a good job and not only utilizing their tax dollars for good public service, but also the opportunity to ask them about where do they see the future of Branson being, personally, what they'd like to see developed and invested in. So that's an option for you all to consider, for us to go down. How I'd envision that is that'd be something we develop in-house. We do a mailer with a digital component on our social media and in other avenues. But again, just to get feedback, right, and to really make sure that the sample size that we've connected with here in town to talk with about some of these issues, making sure that's truly reflective of the rest of the community's wants. So that's an option for you. The only negative to that would be that does delay down this process of having an economic development manual update sooner in time. However, good policy sometimes takes those extra steps, right, to make sure we're going down the right path. So that's just some feedback I think that would be really helpful to hear from you tonight, whether that's something we should embark down with in city government or begin a first draft. And I'll turn it back over to Kathy.
Oh, you don't have to turn it all the way over if you're not done. But I just wanted to mention one thing. The reason I think that the survey might be a wise idea, because I'm always a full speed to the edge of the cliff person too, as you all know, but so many of our business owners don't live in Branson. And so I think it's really important that we get feedback from the business owners of all sizes. So I think a survey like that could be sent to those business addresses and asking the proprietors to help us and give us their feedback. So that's why I think it might be worth that extra step. Not too expensive. We're not going to get all bananas over the whole thing, but just to get some more well-rounded opinions.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, and I think that could be helpful. the one thing that, and I took the survey that we did, but then to see the results tonight, one thing that was absolutely consistent was blighted areas 76. So I would almost say, what are the next steps? The next steps can be do your survey, get those answers, but let's seriously look at that phase one and come up with in the next couple months. I think Joe talked about last time you mentioned that I think you used the term speculative TIF, right? And that kind of just piqued my interest. And what does that look like? Or what is, some other, because that checks the boxes that we saw tonight on the survey results. Blighted area, it's 76, it's tourism. I mean, it really hits all those categories. So I guess that's my ask would be, do the survey, continue to gather the information, but then let's also look at what are some specific things we could maybe do with that segment.
Absolutely.
Joe, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nothing further from me, Mayor. Thank you.
I would like to take the time. Brian, I think there was a few of you that wanted to make some comments or ask questions.
Mayor, we also have Alderman Rodriguez with his hand up as well, again, just letting you know.
Chuck? Oh,
Yeah, just
Go
want
ahead,
to
go
comment
ahead.
real quick
Yeah.
on the mailing flyer. I think that might be a little skewed because you're not going to be able to send out mailers to people that need affordable housing. So that might not be as high. Just my 2 cents.
good point.
Yeah, so put a pin in that in the same way that we put a pin in what Cody's saying, that we know those are our two big rocks, and then we move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glenn, you have something to share?
Hi, Glenn Schultz. First of all, I agree, it's an exciting time. Appreciate all the work that's going into this and the public input that's going into it too. It's good stuff. A comment was made during the first presentation that's a little concerning. And that was the use of the word secret in relation to your ballots. As a publicly deliberating body, I don't really think we want to hear that there's secret ballots in our aldermen. So could I suggest that we publish each alderman's response to that survey as part of the record?
Oh, to the survey that we took?
Yes, with your names, so we know how you ranked it. Yeah. Then the other thing I'd like to suggest is, I think along the line of what Cody was talking about, it's clear that we've got this 76th Street blight on the entrance to 76. And it's clear there's economic tools that we could use to potentially move that along. And there's probably more tools than just simply tax incentive tools. There's infrastructure tools and other things that has not been talked about in this discussion. But I think to see success in that entrance to 76, we're going to have to be much more specific as to what we're looking to have show up there. Not just fill up the lots with something. We're going to have to drill down to the next level and say, here's what we're missing, here's what we want. These are our priorities, not simply sell the lot, get something built there. So the other thing I would like to just comment on the survey itself, I'm a little concerned about the statistical accuracy of the survey. When you survey with general questions about what is short-term, what's midterm, what's long-term, and then you answer questions about what's midterm, short-term, and long-term, and you combine those results, they're not answering the same way. So just use a little caution with those types of surveys that statistically, they can be very misleading. I think probably the results are about where everybody was thinking, but it just doesn't work when you survey the status and the answer and try to combine them in a set of questions. Also, weighted averages in a ranking is usually not a good way to go in that type of survey either. So just use a little caution in terms of drawing conclusions from that survey. Continue to use the information, but don't take that survey as the right conclusions at this point, would be my caution.
Hey, Glenn, So if I can respond to a couple of things you said, this was never meant to be like a highly scientific survey tool. It was the only way we could garner the input from our
I understand.
aldermen
Yeah.
and
And that's
just to be able-
clear.
Yeah, just to get the feel, is what really we were looking for on that. And the other thing you mentioned, which was another very good comment, which is what do we want to see in that area of 76, and not just put anything in there and just say we're all done, we did something for economic development. That's why the 76 CID, I think, is going to, the committee members are going to be a really important part of the conversation. And of course, we in city, at city staff, we've been very involved in the design layout and looking for what types of things will fit into the overall design of the whole redoing of the Country Boulevard of 76.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm just simply suggesting if we survey all of our businesses and the answer is fix the entrance to 76, that's not the answer we need, right? So we've got to give thought to what we're surveying the constituents about so that we get the answers that we need into that plan.
I love
Because
that.
simply putting that on the top of our economic development list and waiting for developers to walk in the door
Right.
isn't going to get us very far.
Couldn't agree with you more. These are just the beginning steps that we're taking to get the conversation started. And then I totally agree, that's such an important intersection. That's really an entrance into Branson. I think just that topic alone will warrant public conversations,
Yes.
kind of like what we're having here. So really, this is our gateway, if you'll forgive my reusing that term, but to the conversation of economic development, excitement, and momentum. And there'll be lots more conversations to come on those very important points that you raised, so thank you.
Yeah, the other one that I just want to comment on is the housing situation. Frankly, you can look back in 4 or 6 years of elections and conversations, and this topic has sat there largely in its current state throughout those 6 years. And we've had issues with people that have tried to develop affordable housing, and the friction developed within the community. And you've had to deal with some of those on this board. So I think when we talk about affordable housing, it's going to require a much more considerate and detailed plan. And it's not just, we want to do economic development for affordable housing. That's not going to do it. We'll be back in the same position 4 years from now. I think we're going to have to say, no, here's specifically what we're looking for. Here's the areas that we want to put it. Here's the zoning that we're going to put in place to make sure it happens. And even here's the land that we're going to annex to make this thing happen. Whatever it takes, it's got to be that specific. I think if we just sit and talk about we need affordable housing, we'll just grind that mill forever and we won't get any results. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
This was definitely not a scientific survey, so we probably would have used Qualtrics for that. This was SurveyMonkey, the free version probably.
Takes an engineer to tell us what we're
Exactly,
doing.
so thank you for those comments. As to releasing the information on individual results, we actually just are not able to aggregate that. So that was not part of our survey design. So the answers are anonymous. That was sent via link to the Alderman emails. So that information is not available.
Okay, let me put this another way then. We should never do a blind survey that we cannot publicize what the aldermen are voting on. Period.
It wasn't, it's not like official votes, it was just
I
as
understand, but
administration.
you're a publicly
Right.
deliberating body.
Right, but then
and
they
you
get
did
the
a
chance-
survey that you're now basing conclusions on that's not available for public scrutiny.
Okay, thank you for that, and we'll talk more about that going forward, but just so you know, there's nothing untoward going on here. We were just trying to get kind of just so you know, I don't want there to be
I
any
didn't say that,
illusions.
Kathy.
No, you didn't, but I want to make sure nobody else thought that, that's
Well,
all, I'm not saying you did.
I'm on the opposite side of that coin. I'm looking at it and making sure nobody says that.
Gotcha,
And I want to make sure
Thank you.
that this board keeps working in that direction.
thank you, appreciate that.
And just for clarity, I'd like to add that, from my perspective, I think Marshall explained his was, it was through the conversations with constituents that I answered those questions. It was through those conversations. It wasn't just my opining and my own personal opinion. It was just based on, the interaction that I had with constituents and business owners, and that's how I looked at those questions. So, that's honestly how I answered them. And, it was great that it was in alignment with what everyone else was hearing from their constituents and the people that they talked to also. And again, it's not the end all. It's like the first step of just like, hey, here's the things we have to kind of look at now. How do we drill down and get real granular with those things? So if you ask me, that survey was more like a 50,000-foot view of really what we're after. And I think, it's a great first step, but, moving forward, yeah, maybe we should be a little more clear on, if you want to know, I don't care. I mean, I'll tell you exactly how I voted on them all.
Well, and Ralph, I'm old school, so when I was doing it on a phone, you went to the next question, and then you're like, oh, wait, I want to kind of cross-reference that, so maybe even doing it on paper, then, I don't know, just suggestions of the future, how we do it, so.
I sure hope you guys are having a lot of fun.
We are.
Okay, because I love what you're doing. It is a lot of fun. The thing about economic development that I love is that most communities, rural communities, have to work from a place of scarcity. But economic development can put you in the mindset of working from a place of abundance. I love what you said about the stewardship. When you're working with being able to make a local decision where you don't have to deal with the state or the federal government. Obviously, your TIF program gives you the power to make that decision, to make things happen. So again, it takes courage. And I just wanted to share with you a couple of things that I hope you might consider. Okay, there's a website called opportunityzones.ohio.gov. Ohio loved the Opportunity Zone program so much that they went one step further and built their own incentive on top of the federal incentive. So they're one of the few states that did it, and there's nothing that says that a local government can't do that as well. The other thing about this website that's quite unique is that when you go to the landing page, it's got 3 buttons on it. One is to the public face that's the investor. The other one is the public face for a local business that wants to attract an investor. And the other button is for the community to say, why should you come here? So there's 3 different buttons. And when you click on the investor, which that's who we are, we're an Opportunity Zone investor, you click on it, and you get to choose from looking at the census tract level or from the county level, or if you don't select anything, it'll show you all 92 businesses that are soliciting money. Now, only 3% of Opportunity Zone funds nationwide, only 3% focus on investing in businesses. And so a lot of businesses, they are not sophisticated enough in the program. Even municipalities and states are not really familiar with the program. So, we can't pick on the little, family business for not knowing this. So here's how it works, so just briefly. If a business leases land inside your Opportunity Zone, they can attract those Opportunity Zone investments into their business. So I don't know why, when you're looking at that place of scarcity, for example, and you've got the haves and the have-nots, and maybe it's a local business that's saying, it's really unfair that this big project got all these TIFs and it got all of this other whatever resources that you allocated to it. Just having your page that opens it up to private investment, even if you don't want a capital stack with it, just get the money here so that everybody gets to play. You've got businesses that are going to create jobs, and hopefully they're going to create high-paying jobs. That should also be incentivized. That's good stewardship. Just looking at a project and saying, oh, that project cost us XYZ, and it's not fair that they get a little bit of help. Well, okay, if it's about the project cost, incentivize them with mission-driven investments in community. The things like this bike path thing that you were looking at on the 27th, some of them have private foundations. Patagonia, for example, it's 100% fully a nonprofit corporation now. Did you know that? Patagonia was the very first American flex corporation. the B corporations, where they're both for-profit and nonprofit. Now they've decided we're 100% nonprofit. We've made all the money we need, and they're just putting all their money into mission-driven investments. So I guess with that, I would say, when you're going back to your drawing board and refining this, don't forget to incentivize number of jobs, higher wages, and mission-driven focus for your community. One other thing, what did I say, one other thing? Okay. You've got your local incentives, but there's more. There's more above. That's in the capital stack, all the way up to the federal level, state level. And I just want to remind you of a couple of things that I'm aware of that are in your area. HUD has determined that you are a DDA. That's called a difficult to develop area, and that has nothing to do with all the rocks. It's just difficult to develop here because returns are difficult to achieve without HUD coming to the table. So regarding stewardship, I agree. Stewardship on local TIFs, it's good to be picky about how you do that. But when it comes to your IRS dollars that you paid Uncle Sam that are going to California, I would unapologetically get those here. Unapologetically get those here. And so the DDA is the tool to get those monies here and build them into the capital stack. What does it get you? New market tax credits, historic tax credits, low to moderate income housing tax credits. There's a SEDS plan that was updated. I think I mentioned that a couple weeks ago. But that's your contract with the EDA that's done in a 10-county area. And they've already identified kind of where the priority, you know how you were talking about we need to identify what areas are a priority? You can, no problem. But just don't forget about the federal government that said that opportunity zone is a priority area. And then they gave you an incentive program to use it in your capital stack, in your industry in new industry attraction, and to help your current businesses that are here locally get investment. Missouri recently was awarded $1.7 billion for broadband expansion. It was the #3 state in the nation to receive some of Biden's bucks. And they've already identified census tracts where they want to see the broadband improvement. So you've got to look at all of, I don't mean to sound like a know-it-all. I'm just so excited about what you're doing that I just want to make sure that you don't leave anything on the table. And just while I was sitting here listening, and I was listening, but I was also multitasking, and I was typing in this keyword search into Google. Economic development incentives best practices. And up popped about 6 studies. Now, you don't have to go do your own best practice and spend more money. You don't have time for that, right? But why not capitalize on the fact that somebody did a best practice in other communities and look at what they did and see if there's something you could snag out of there and throw into the toolbox. Performance agreements, when you're looking at your deal structure and the developer is looking for whatever you're gonna do to help them, you can always build into the performance agreement that you would like to see them do the number of jobs, a certain wage that's maybe above the county statistic, the mission-driven. And let me see, I have one more thing. I haven't said this out loud, but if there was anybody in here that's a commercial broker, you are, right, Mayor? Yeah. Okay. There are 2 main tools that when we were looking for where to bring our opportunity zone investment, all commercial brokers know this. Number 1 is LoopNet, which is owned by CoStar, and number 2 is Crexi, who's getting sued by LoopNet for being a real competitor now. When you're looking at putting a website that's going to identify where properties are, or working with your realtors to find out what off-market listings there are, one of the things that I think you should try to advocate, whether it's through Taney County Partnership or the state of Missouri, is some of the cities on the West Coast that were able to attract that $32 billion was raised in only 1,600 funds. And Missouri only has 1 community, St. Louis, that fell into that top 50. So how do investors find the properties that are for sale, or businesses, by the way, Biz Buy Sell is also owned by CoStar, and so you can find businesses that are for sale as well, and that's another way that Opportunity Zone funds can invest. They can buy a business or invest in a business. And so they're finding them on LoopNet and they're finding them on Crexy because they have a filter where you can check the box and say, I want to find the properties or the businesses in the Opportunity Zone. So instead of using the one that the state of Missouri uses, which is something called local something another, that's not where commercial investors are shopping for real estate. But I'll tell you, I know of a city that on their economic development webpage, this was really brilliant. They paid for LoopNet to be their search engine for finding buildings or space for lease or property for sale. They paid for it, and they saved the commercial realtor a ton of money because they have to pay for like the diamond plan. It's like $10,000 or $20,000 a month. Or if they go in at the silver level, they're only allowed 6 listings. But if the government purchases it, maybe Taney County Partnership would purchase it, for example, you could literally tell your realtors in your local area to post their listings that are in those areas you care about, whether it's the Opportunity Zone area or the tracts that are nearby. You can ask them to upload that, and you're saving them a lot of money to cooperate and list their properties and businesses to list their businesses. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, can I just thank Susan?
What a-
Susan had did you say yes?
Yes.
Okay. Susan and Billy On came in to see Alex and me maybe 2 weeks ago, I think, roughly now. And you can see her excitement when she talks about this really heady, kind of nerdy stuff. But it's very, very important stuff. And I just want to thank you for sharing some of your knowledge with us. I know we were on a short time, but I look forward to many more conversations with you. Thank you.
Susan, we all appreciate your input. Thank you very much. Okay. That would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have motion second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Is that Chuck? We're
I said
adjourned.
yes.
We're adjourned.